Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do a little bit of painting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about rendering some realistic materials on the stylized sketch. So this is a sketch I did a while back. Yeah, so we're gonna paint it up. This was sketched from reference, from a photo reference I found on Pinterest. Yeah, I was just practicing some stylization. So yeah, so the way I have my layers set up currently is I just have a black sketch. I have a toned background. There's a little bit of texture, but it doesn't, it's just for the sketchbook look. And the first thing I'm gonna do is just mask out using a pencil brush and a sort of gray tone. I'm just gonna go around this and create a mask to paint on, just to keep everything super clean. So I'm just gonna kind of go around the silhouette and try to pay attention, stay within the lines like we learned in kindergarten. And the reason I'm using the pencil tool is because there's no anti-aliasing on it, so it makes it super easy to fill in Photoshop. If you're using a program like Procreate or I think Clip Studio has better fill tools than Photoshop, but that just allows you to get a really clean mask. You can shift click to use to create straight lines. And yeah, so it's just going to kind of be a chill demo. I don't really have any particular subjects to talk about. I hope you guys weren't too frustrated at my last video, which was kind of a joke video on creating backgrounds. Because I don't really do backgrounds for my character designs. It's something that I should probably work on. But a while back, I think I just decided to focus on character design and really dial in other aspects of my illustration. So focusing on anatomy and focusing on costume design, portraiture, and then hairstyles, different looks and stuff. So that's kind of what I've been digging into lately. Over the last year, though, I have worked a lot on stylization and trying to strike a little bit of a balance between what I learned in terms of like realism and realistic rendering, and how to treat like how to paint things that look three-dimensional with lighting and materials and all that stuff, and trying to bring some of the things I learned about realism and some of the things I learned about stylization together in a harmonious way. So this is kind of going to be I'm going to try my hand at really bringing together stylization and realism. So the way I drew these folds, the structure is there. Like I know sort of what the three-dimensional structure of the folds are going to be. It's just a matter of rendering the materials and stuff. So now that I have my mask, I'm going to lock it, because right now it's just gray. And I'm going to fill in some local colors. So I'll start with she's wearing like a jean jacket. So I'll go with a little bit of a kind of a desaturated blue, like a mid blue. Maybe bring a little bit cooler. I'm going to stay on the more desaturated side for now, because as we paint, we'll bring in more light and value contrast, but also the most more saturated colors, slowly but surely, building up that vibrance in the material, in the whole color palette. And now I'm kind of just blocking in a color for the skin. The skin, I kind of treat the hair and the skin as one element, because there's a lot of soft transitions between the hair and skin, especially surrounding the face. So to keep that transition as kind of clean as possible, or as like less, not as harsh, I just kind of block it all out as one color. So now I can, if I just hide the mask, you can see that when I zoom in, see the kind of hard edge. So that's makes it easy to select things really cleanly. And I can, shift it maybe towards a little bit of a warmer color so that I get a little bit of a warm undertone to the skin, maybe something like that. Try not to go too light. Oh, not that, not green. And then so this will kind of be my base mask. So I'm just gonna save this in a group and duplicate it. That'll make it easy later if I want to select things. I can use the fill layer as a mask to select either that section or that section. And the line art I'll just keep separated for now, because here I'm actually going to set this maybe to a different blending mode, like linear light, and drop the fill so that it picks up the color underneath, something like that. So you can see it becomes kind of brown here on top of the red, and a little like a dark blue. So that's the blending mode that's picking up the fill color, and it just makes it blend easier down to the painting. And now I can basically work on a layer in between the line art for now and the fill layer, clipping it down with Control-Alt-G, creating a clipping mask, or just right-clicking on the layer and creating a clipping mask. That way I'll always have my line art on top to refer to, and then I'll have the masks on the bottom, which I'll just lock. So I can also go here and select. So starting with the coat, the jean jacket, I'm gonna sort of I'm gonna start by laying in the shadows. So a good trick for picking shadow colors is you always want to kind of go in a curve towards black. So if this is your local color, you don't want to go straight down like in this direction to pick your shadow color. You kind of want to go diagonally so that it's more saturated in the shadows, and a little less saturated in the highlights. And that'll just keep things not, like, it'll avoid things being muddy. And also, I think for this one I'll want warmer shadows and cooler highlights. So I'm also going to bring it a little bit into the cyans. And I pick my shadow color, something like that. So just because I'm kind of cutting into the warmer colors, like green, if yellow, like orange yellow is your warmest color, the fastest way from blue is, you could go through purple because they're complementary colors, but I find purple is a cooler color than green. It's all sort of relative, but yeah. So I'm just gonna lay in some broad shadows for now, kind of, and just laying out where the main, like overall what's darker. So here we have some dark down here. And I'll shift my colors a little bit just to create some variety. The idea is to go from big to small. So I want to lay in just a lot of variety. And kind of slowly build up, different tones. So the things that are further back are going to be a little bit darker. So things like this part of the coat and this underside. the things that I want to draw less attention to. And then things that are closer to the viewer, like closer to the camera, are going to be a little bit lighter. And also, like especially jean, anything that's like a jean material will kind of fade where it's more exposed. So the insides of the collars, for example, will be less faded than the outside, like the sleeves. I can use my second version of this soft brush, which is just set to soft light, and that will help me just kind of glaze in some other tones and shadows. So this shadow gets pretty deep in here. I'm not too scared of going quite dark in this block and stage. I'm trying to lay in color values. So, you know, major blocks of color basically that are sort of in the right value family, so that I can get a really good read on how the general form is reading. If there's a sense of three-dimensionality, or if I need to push values darker. So here I'm kind of laying in some ambient occlusion in those recessed areas. Here. I'm really trying to think about what I'm putting down on the canvas before I brush it, to try to be a little bit like a little efficient with my brush strokes. Here, get a shadow under there. You can see it's starting to build, you know, starting to build some form. Just quick check on that read. Now I'll sort of bring the head to the same stage, so I can bring. I'll actually keep this on soft light for now, because that'll build a nice saturation in the skin. So I'll just go a little bit darker than 50% gray, and you can see with it set to soft light, when I overlay, it becomes quite saturated. I can even go a little bit redder, something like that. Let me just select this again. I'm kind of building undertones to the skin. So where I want warmth and these sort of like orange colors to come through, I'll sort of build, you know, add more saturation. So even though the hair in my reference is like a dark brown, I'll still, you know, lay in some saturated reds. That'll create some sort of subsurface scattering and just warmer tones under the skin in general. Maybe around the cheeks a little bit. Now I'm back to my normal brush. I'll go a little bit lighter and less saturated, so it creates a bit of a cooler tone in the highlights. I'll just start sort of laying in some general highlight shapes. And I'm concentrating on modeling the form right now more than getting the perfect color. I want to make it feel three-dimensional, because like the drawing is quite stylized, but I do want it to feel kind of lifelike, and you know, bring some fleshiness to the skin, and make it feel three-dimensional. So here I'm, you know, moving to my color palette, trying to pick an appropriate color to put in every time I put a new brushstroke on the canvas. It's a very sort of traditional approach where I'm treating this like my paint palette, and then, you know, laying it on really like almost like oil paint or acrylics or something, rather than you know, really abusing layer blending modes and stuff that might be fancy on the surface, but you lose a little bit of control over. So, you know, I'm just working on a normal layer, and making sure I'm picking the right color that I want. Here we have a bit of a highlight on the shoulder, and I'll bring a little bit of saturation around that. I like to work with a soft brush and build the structure slowly, like kind of build the drawing towards, or the painting towards the sharpest edges, and like slowly but surely. So everything looks a little bit washed out in the beginning, and then it slowly gets refined. And then I'll at the end I sort of pick out the sharpest edges, sort of like that, you know, where I keep a sharp edge just to show the form of the finger. And so overall, color-wise, I think this is basically a complementary color scheme where the skin and the hair is going to be quite warm, like orange, and then the jean jacket is blue, so that's, you know, a complementary scheme. But then I'll also try to bring some blues and purples and stuff into the hair, especially in the highlights, which are going to be a little bit cooler, just to reinforce that complementary color scheme. So it'll be a little more subtle, but that way it's harmonious. You don't want it to be, you know, completely split. In the same way that I can bring some browns, like some more desaturated browns and oranges, like in some of the jean jacket seams. Sometimes you'll see like different colored stitching, or even in the buttons are kind of orange too, like copper or something. So I can bring some of that, and so bring a little bit of warmth into the cool colors, and bring a little cool colors into the warm tones. You could even make her eyes blue or something, but we'll do specific features and stuff in the end. So here we have a basic layout. Now I'm just gonna sort of darken, tone the hair down, to kind of bring it to that sort of dark brown value, and just kind of laying in some main shadow shapes. So if you're interested in seeing how I paint hair, or my approach to painting hair, I just put out a hair tutorial on drawing and painting hair. So here I'm, and actually that goes much more in depth about, you know, what I'm laying in. But right now I'm kind of just laying in shadow shapes, thinking about where the core shadow is, where the cast shadows are, you know, what's turning away from the light and what's in the light source. So this is pretty recessed, pretty deep shadow. That'll be quite dark, and then here this is all turning away from the light. And then we have a darker hairstyle. bring some darker tones around the eyes. Still want to be careful around the main features. You don't want to lose the like the appeal of the drawing. So there was a certain level of appeal in the face that I don't want to mud up with my painting. So I'll just double check back to that every once in a while to make sure it's not lost, and then I'm just reinforcing the drawing, basically, like bringing the best out of the drawing instead of like mushing a whole bunch of stuff on top. I can even bring down the fill on the drawing so that the painting shows through even more. Yeah, so now we have a bit of a block out. We have some main things cut out, so I'm gonna merge this down to my flat colors, and I'll just clip my my drawing on top, and I'm just gonna paint on this layer now. So I will need to be careful at like this sort of transition here between the two flats to not mud that up too much, but I can also play with the harshness of that edge. I'll drop this down even more, maybe something like this, and I'll duplicate this and save this as a copy on the very top, but now this is all like one layer. So if I need to check back at my line drawing, I can always, just hide this layer. But for now, I'm just going to paint all on one layer so I can focus on modeling and edge control. So kind of introducing more variety. I'm looking at the secondary details and doing a little bit of form modeling now. I'm still using my soft brush. I'm not concentrating on texture. I'm just looking at form, like how to make it look three-dimensional. And that's with, thinking about where the light source is coming from, finding the thickness in the material. I can kind of sample from around the image to pick colors. But I think this is where most of the work is done, like in the modeling stage. I think it's the longest stage because it takes a lot of like kind of calculations to get a drawing to start to feel three-dimensional. Kind of rendering things like a render engine in your head. And yeah, because I'm trying to bring realism to this stylized portrait, my goal isn't to make it photoreal, because that can be a little bit uncanny. If you have like a really stylized shape design, and then you have like really photoreal materials and stuff, it kind of your brain, it's too much of a disconnect between the design and the rendering, I guess. I mean, there is ways of balancing it out, but I think what I'm shooting for is like maybe in the shape design it's like 80% stylized and 20% realistic, and then in the rendering it's like 80% realistic and 20% stylized. So I might leave out like 20%, that last 20% of realistic detail, and stylize it a little bit. Like give the impression of detail, but not go full throttle. And I can kind of go over and fix some of my line art. Or just like refine the shapes that I was trying to create. So fabric can be a little bit tricky to give a good impression of, but it really just comes down to understanding the form of the thing that you're looking at and being consistent with your lighting. So if something is facing me in this case, like the light source is pretty straight on, a little bit overhead, but not really coming from an angle. So everything basically facing the camera is going to be the lightest, and then everything turning away from that is going to be darker. But so I try, as long as you're sort of consistent with your lighting strategy and you understand the forms that the cloth is making, then you can kind of render it like anything else, basically. It is also good to understand the main sort of folds that cloth will make. So you have you have draping folds, you have curtain folds, I think you have like hemlocks, but there's all sorts of names for them. I think Modern Day James has a really awesome video breaking down cloth and how different folds are created and what they look like, kind of diagrammatically. So I'd suggest checking that out. It's a great video. I think it's where I learned most of like how I gained a bit of a universal understanding for cloth. And then the rest is just like doing a lot of cloth studies and seeing the patterns that they create. Certain folds will create certain shapes, like some are more triangular, some are more like spirals, and having that shape language built into your I guess your visual library. It makes it easier to refer to, especially if you're creating stuff from imagination. You can design folds that are believable without them, without really needing a photo reference. But here I am using photo reference. Like I have the Pinterest reference in front of me. No, I think I'm gonna duplicate this, just to work on a sort of copy. Maybe at the end I can do a step through, going from blockout to this to the next version, just to see the main steps. But because now I'm basically in the modeling phase, as I mentioned before. But you'll see that modeling stage is like, there are less drastic changes. I'm just kind of pushing and pulling forms maybe 10% everywhere, to really refine the material and stuff, like the shapes of the material. And then in the detailing stage where I add texture and stuff, it'll be even less, but like less major lighting form changes. But it'll bring that last little amount of detail that really makes it pop. Here I'm just making sure that my layer is locked so that no matter how sloppy I am, I always stay within the silhouette. Remembering to go back to my palette, my paint palette, and picking colors that just that to introduce variety. Like, it doesn't need to be 100% accurate. I mean, unless you're going or a super classical, like, needs to be photoreal look. But I'm just picking, you know, some cooler tones, some warmer tones, just to create variety and interest. And it creates a nice little playful color moments. You know, and especially in the sleeve, you know, where I started working on, there's a lot of fun things happening with cooler blues and warmer blues, relatively speaking, in different areas. The other thing is I constantly have my other my middle and index finger on my brush size. So even though it's a soft brush, I'm constantly changing the brush size, because if I used to have a really bad habit of keeping the same brush size for like the whole painting, and that just created a really flat, kind of boring surface to the painting, where like the brush strokes are super obvious and repetitive. So I'm just avoiding that. Now I do it naturally, but I did go through like a phase where I was constantly reminding myself to change brush sizes and really adhere to or like try to be more efficient with my brush strokes. Always basically trying to use the biggest brush stroke possible to represent anything in your painting. Now we're getting a little bit of form variety. Push, push, push. Something else I'll do is just change the color of my background. So I'm just going to set this to multiply and darken it so that I can have a better read on the values. There's like having subtle value change is really important to show form, because you don't want, for example, if you paint like a light on dark, and it's easy to make it look like it was just spray painted on the surface, but really subtle value changes will make the form turn. Now, so now I created like a hump, or a bump, humps and bumps and pinches and squashes and little subtle like valleys and peaks in the surface. So it just makes it easier to see the really subtle changes when you have a dark background. I almost never paint on white. I'll often display my work on a white background just because I find it super clean, but painting on a white background is really, really difficult, just because you can't, like, the contrast is so stark that there's a super awesome silhouette read. It's great for presentation, but it's really hard to see the subtle form modeling. Here I'm kind of glazing over the shadows, which were starting to get a little bit muddy, with a more saturated color. It's kind of just bringing it up towards a more saturated tone. And here we have a little lip, and the second one. Pretty dark shadow under the elbow, and I can kind of let the form shadow of the elbow melt into the cast shadow underneath. because I don't want a really harsh line down here because it's far from the face. And kind of let the shadows melt into the light a little more smoothly so that it's not distracting. I don't want to distract away from the face. And then here, kind of breaking up that shape. Yeah. And this section here I can darken up a little bit because it's the inside of the collar. It'll be less faded than the outside. Same for this. And here there's quite some pretty dark shadows. And then right on the edge here, I want to show, like, on edges of jean clothing, you get the most wear, almost like you would get if you airbrushed or dry brushed, like a light coat of paint just on the edges. So just on like the peaks of those seams. Now I'll get into, I may do a little bit right now, but it'll mostly happen in the sort of detailing. So I might lay down a couple little things. So I'm going warmer. I'm going with a sort of warmer yellow color just to add a little bit of variety, but you can see this yellow is very desaturated, so it'll almost just feel like a warm gray. Yeah. Slowly building up layers, going from big to small. And I'm still using the same old brush. Here. Everything's still pretty undefined. Like no sharp edges anywhere. That can be frustrating for some people, like they want a finished product right away. But I kind of like staying in this cloudy state for as long as I can. I like the look of it. It kind of feels... somebody mentioned I think it was on an Instagram post, that it almost feels like a dream or like nostalgic. You're looking at an undefined image and you have to kind of build the rest in your head. And I like that idea because I visualize like what I want to paint. Like I'm pretty good at visualizing things in my head. So I kind of like working in this cloudy state, almost like blurring your eye without actually physically having to blur your eye. And that, yeah, it just allows me to see where or to imagine, picture, visualize where I'm going with the painting as I'm working on it. And like slowly build things up and trusting that, you know, in the final stages I'll have hard edges and soft edges and a lot of variety. But the form is a thing that's paramount. I'm pretty zoomed in, but I'm really careful not to make big changes, you know. If you do go in to detail stuff and to be more accurate, just make sure that the changes you're making are really subtle, because if you make any big changes, when you zoom back out it can look like garbage because you weren't you're too harsh with your changes. So I think from far, sort of reading genie. Maybe I'll bring out the contrast of this shoulder a little bit. So I want the shoulder to contrast with the elbow, or the collar, sorry, a little bit more. So I'll bring out a bit of lightness there. Maybe make it a tad more desaturated, so it feels like it's almost like faded. Yeah, something like that. And then maybe at the elbow here, it's kind of the same. I'm just kind of glazing over everything to make it a little bit lighter. And yeah, let's duplicate this again. And we'll lock this layer to keep the history of it. And now let's work on the face. So I like to work on the face before the hair, because the hair will overlap the face. I kind of try to work from back to front, like you would traditionally. And that way any flyaway hairs and stuff can kind of layer over, and it just, creates a lot of depth. So I'll try to stay zoomed out, like fairly zoomed out. And now I'm gonna try to nail down the shapes and the values of the different parts of the face. So kind of laid in stuff, but now we're really gonna model things to bring out all the different forms of the face. So we have kind of using the same color, but we have the highlights on the forehead, on the cheek. We'll have the bridge of the nose, and that the inner. So everything that's basically facing the light. So this we'll have that transition. So we'll have inside here the bridge of the nose, the tip of the nose, and the sort of part of the lip. So those are basically all the surfaces that are facing the light, and I'll kind of model them to be a similar value. And then here we have a sort of, it's gonna be a little bit tricky because now I'm trying to balance the stylization of the anatomy with with the realistic material, and they kind of go hand in hand, because the skin will wrap around bone and muscle and stuff, but I want to simplify the anatomy and the form so that it's a little bit, I guess, more, not like more appealing, but just simplified, just to have your eye rest a little easier. I don't need such dense detail as a realistic face. But I do want to get the sort of main local values in the same range as my reference, so that I can still have that three-dimensional feeling. This is going to be quite dark. Another thing I've been playing around with is just like how little can I do and still keep the photo or the illustration look like it's complete. Like how much information do I really need to put in an illustration? It's a good challenge. Like I don't think it's something that should be your main priority, especially when you're starting out. Like you just want to create a nice picture or illustration. So you shouldn't be really thinking too much about optimizing, and more just about getting it right. But I think I think I can say for myself that I've been achieving what I've kind of set out to achieve in terms of illustration. Like there's always stuff I want to work on, but I know I can achieve a certain aesthetic if I work long enough on it. So now it's just about challenging myself, I guess, and see if I can either be more optimal and do things faster so that I can produce more and have like just explore more stuff, or you know, explore other avenues like stylization and you know, different color schemes that I haven't tried before and all that sort of stuff. Oh, now I'm kind of subconsciously working on the hair, but you know, I do jump around. I am methodical for the most part, but if I'm rambling, I'll probably jump around anyway. So something I like to do around the hair is kind of bring this really saturated color just at the perimeter, and it kind of gives like it kind of does like subsurface scattering under the hair and gives a lot of like depth, because like skin is a really complex material, but one of the main things is that it's a little bit translucent, and yeah, light scatters through it, so all the blood vessels and you know, arteries and muscles and different levels of the dermis and the epidermis and all the Latin words, they create all this variation under the skin. And when light scatters through the skin, especially because there's blood and stuff under the skin, it kind of creates a lot of color variety in the oranges and reds. Also, you have sunspots and blemishes and things like that create a whole bunch of variety. But you know, even though I might not show that detail, like I won't go in with a texture brush and make all sorts of sunspots and freckles and, you know, skin pores and stuff. I do want to bring that color variety. So the way I stylized this, she has a little bit of a smaller nose, so I'm not going to make the cast shadow as harsh as the reference, but I do want to show the form. So, you know, I do need a cast shadow and a form shadow. That's what I'm laying in here. So that kind of pops the nose off the face. A mistake I see really often is that people make the highlight on both cheeks the same. And that makes, if you put a really harsh highlight over here on the cheek, it makes the cheek feel like it's almost wrapping around the nose and coming off the face. Where most often it's just better to deepen the shadow so that you still have value contrast on that side, but it makes the whole face feel more three-dimensional than just making the highlights super bright everywhere. Because ultimately you just want to make the highlights the same value if they're all facing the same direction. So like on the forehead and maybe on this part of the shoulder, they might be facing the light source in a similar way. So I can, you know, put a highlight in both those areas that are a similar value. There's also just like artistic interpretation. You know, sometimes you want to bring more contrast to the face than to the rest of the illustration. So you might have your brightest brights and your darkest darks all around like the eye, for instance. Even if other parts are just as like equally lit. Here, modeling a little bit. We have a cast shadow from the collar. So bringing that thumb kind of under that. And now I'm gonna bring my hairbrush, work a little bit on the hair. I'll go with like a dark blue around the highlights, maybe. I bring some cool tones in here. Just kind of playing around with it. Some very darks back here. Bringing some more detail around the face and less detail the further you get away. Like more blurry detail, I guess. And here we have some glossy shadow shapes. Side as well. I'm going to keep some of these shapes pretty graphic. Like I said, it's like 80% realistic and 20% stylized for the rendering. So that 20% of the stylization comes in the shape design of the shadow. So I'm trying to nail realistic values and colors, and then stylize the shapes. Overall, the hair could go a little bit darker. And I'm bringing the local value of the whole hair down by sort of glazing on top of it with this dark purple color. Well, that was more or less successful. It's a little more matte, but I'll bring back some highlights. Some cool highlights in here. Maybe a couple here. These are a little bit repetitive. Maybe I do make the eye a little bit of a light gray or something, which will pop out even more because she's wearing a blue coat. So even though this color, right, is still brown, like if you look in the color palette, it feels kind of blue compared to all the really warm colors in the skin. And this side will be much more subtle because it's in the shadow. Always try to pick an eye to be the mascot. Like pick one focal point like this, right? Like I want your eye to go here. Actually, there's some small adjustments to be made here. Darkening that inner corner and bringing, like, kind of shifting this whole eye over just a little bit to make it feel like they're both looking in the same direction. Yeah, there you go. And then here, eyes feel a little bit bloodshot, so we'll bring a cooler gray into the white of the eye, just to sort of neutralize that color, not make it look like she's been up for 3 days. Often there's quite a bit of redness around the eyes, especially if someone's wearing makeup. Generally, you neutralize eye circles, like sleepy bags under the eyes, with like a concealer that has a warm color, to kind of unify all the skin on the face. And sometimes they even exaggerate that by bringing really punchy orange and red tones around the eyes, which is kind of a cool look. Like it adds a lot of vibrance around the eyes. So well, that's kind of looking like something. And here, kind of make that shadow of the lip and far cheek kind of all bleed together. And here we have some hair. And some oranges. Play the oranges off the blues. So anywhere there's like a lot of blue, you can kind of put a little bit of orange right beside it. That those complementary colors resonate one next to the other. I'll just kind of darken the this one there. I'll just darken some of these core shadows, kind of make the hair shine a little bit. See, that highlight color makes a little more sense now. Once you darken things down, relatively this highlight is quite a bit lighter than the rest of the hair. But you only sort of notice that once you bring the local value into the right zone. I'm not sure if I want a pupil or not, given the level of stylization. If I just want it like that, I kind of like that. I'll keep it like that for now, and maybe I'll bring it. Oh no, I'll keep it pupil. Okay, so let's duplicate this again, and unlock this so we can compare again once we kind of finish. So that's basically the blocking done. And now I'm going to kind of go into detailing. So we're about an hour in. It's an okay pace, at least for this demo. I don't want to make it, eternal, since this isn't really it's more of a study than a purposeful illustration. But so now I'm going to use this hairbrush to kind of outline. It gives me a little bit more precision and a little bit of texture. Not like tons of texture, not like these texture brushes like this, which I might only use a little bit of at the very, very end. But this will, allow me to bring out some edges and little folds, especially for this jean material. Kind of create an impression of this sort of fabric. I'll kind of do a lot of color picking from all over the place. I'll also try to reserve the any texture that I put down to basically where the highlight meets the like in the halftones, basically where the highlight rolls over to become a shadow, and not put it everywhere. Because if I put texture all over like this, it just quickly becomes super noisy, and it becomes really difficult to read the form. So I try to keep it close to the the junctions, so where seams happen and where two pieces of the clothing meet, and where highlight shadow rolls over into the light. It's just a good rule of thumb. Also try not to over detail the these jean seams that have like a double stitch to them, because that can get real time consuming. So I'll kind of just make my brush really big and just indicate a couple little folds and then move on. Here. So just by glazing a little bit of that over here and not in the light, and create like a lot of texture. Also, cotton, jeans have a direction to them, to the fabric. Normally, if you look at a washed jean or something, they generally have a direction. So you kind of use that to my advantage. big, and then just bring a couple harder edges in here. I thought this used to be on soft light. To check my brush setup again. Just refining some of these shadows. And then glazing over a little bit of texture. That might have been too overboard. Now in here, there's a stitch coming through, or a seam. So I can just kind of indicate that on top. So by glazing over really lightly, that means I won't have to remodel what's underneath, because it'll pick up the shadows. And wrap over this form. Render. This is it's just long and tedious, but I love it. It's very relaxing. I don't normally listen to music. I just render in silence and think about stuff. Think about my life. What I'm gonna eat for supper, as it's around 5:30 right now. It's just about time. Normally it's about time to get stuff cooking, but I had this idea to do this character and voice over the tutorial just before, so I guess we'll do this and then eat a little later, but that's okay, it's the weekend. Here, just refining, really looking at what overlaps are happening. Where can I bring out a little highlight? This is a focal, like a secondary focal point. You know, the elbow turning in. So I want that to be a nice little moment where stuff is pretty resolved. I'm just kind of color picking from around and slowly building up to the hardest edges. I'm doing this modeling again before texturing. Soften some of these shadows. In here we have just kind of wrapping around the sleeve, and it gets pretty dark. Refining all those shapes. here you have just some subtle little folds along the bottom of the jean. This can be a lost edge. Now I'm really thinking about polishing this, like what do I want the final image to look like? So I'm mostly thinking about edges, the sort of the final form of things, texture, all that fun stuff. You know, if I'm hitting the right values, like if things are too light or too dark, I'll glaze over them and bring them to that final value. You can see like all the little changes add a lot of texture and just interest. So here, you know, introducing a harder edge into that crease. Maybe a little bit of texture. Trying to wrap the texture around the form. And forget about switching colors. I think I can use maybe what's this one? I think this is a pretty, yeah. I'm gonna use just a little bit of this. Maybe bring the flow way down to like, yeah, 25%. So this is just a really grainy version of that airbrush, just to pop out some of these highlights. I think it works well for the jean. It can be a little bit rough. Just a lot of small changes, just modeling, pushing. So, you know, we try to do the major forms and slowly dial in smaller and smaller shapes, smaller overlaps. You know, looking into memory folds, so you have these little sharp lines from every time the jean jacket was folded. You can also dial these back, you know, if I go too extreme. Here, your stuff creases, but it just creates all these little moments that you'll pick up on at the very end, I guess, when you're observing it. Little triangles, some little seams going through the buttons, a little bit of wear. It's starting to look like something, especially when you zoom out. You have all that variety. let's work on, let's do some shiny buttons. So these buttons are a little bit like copper, I think. So let's pick a highlight color. I go over this, that's kind of pink. So I'm gonna go into the yellows. And then I'm gonna slowly sort of build up the highlight with my layer set to soft light. So I think that's enough for that one. And then maybe something like that here. This one will have a brighter highlight on this side, and maybe a little bounce light in there. And I'll come back with some shadows afterward, but this will have a bit of light on that side. This one will catch it on this side and the inside here. There. And then we can come in with the shadow color and just kind of deepen the areas around it and really get that metallic feel by sharpening the contrast. Something like that. You can even have a little bit of a cast shadow to show it has volume. And then around these ones, we'll have a little bit, some little folds. There's a little pop of contrast. And while I'm here, I can kind of bring some more depth to these couple stitches. Maybe these ones. Bring that warm color into the seam a little bit. Just glazing some colors around, bringing more variety. Don't want everything to be the same color. I also don't want the glazes to be really like this is yellow and that's yellow and that's yellow and that's yellow, like repetitive like that. I want everything to bleed into one another. I'm also going to just concentrate where I'm glazing the warmer colors. Into the sort of more faded areas. That's a little bit of work there. You can come back to the face and do a little bit of work on the junction between the hair and the skin could use some work. So set this back to normal. So we have some, just sort of refine the area around the face so that it feels really natural. We have a couple flyaways. And then design these highlights. So we'll have sharpest highlight right there. Here we can break up the eyebrows a little bit. Really pay attention to the structure of the face and like making sure stuff is symmetrical. You don't want like wonky, like sometimes you can easily overwork the features and then it makes things look like either a little uncanny or you overlook some aspect of the structure of the face. So I want to bring detail, especially around the eyes, but I don't want it to look like, I don't want to accidentally make her look really old or something by putting unnecessary folds and wrinkles and stuff. So I want to give her some life, but not like, I don't know how to explain it. Just balancing appeal and realism. It's like the never-ending struggle. So here we have, kind of exaggerate the shape of the cast shadow. And darken down the deepest parts of the eyelid. And here we have a highlight on the nose, which I didn't really bring out earlier. I don't want to over detail the nose, but I will introduce some sharp lines so that there's still structure. I just don't want like any big creases, any really like overly defined form changes and stuff. Yeah, it's all about subtlety at this point. Creating really small gradients. Because I want all the features to be there, The Cupid's bow and the cheekbones and the cartilage around the nose. Like I want that realism. Like the anatomy needs to be there, but it needs to be stylized and showing a little bit of restraint on how much to define it. Having a lot of lost edges, like that's too much. And the thing is, there's always a lot of different strategies to define things. Like you could add more shadow, but you could also add more highlight around it. Like you could create the hard edge a lot of different ways, and that's sort of up to it's kind of a judgment call you need to take with how you approach that, and you kind of need to scan over everything and make sure that your values are right, that you have the right color and stuff to inform your decision. Especially when it comes to more like stylistic decisions. You know, there's a point in every artist's career or development where you start to ask yourself, like, how do you want to differentiate yourself from reality? Like, do you just want to be a hyper realistic artist? And because I find a lot of the expression comes in how you idealize stuff. You know, you can kind of see into an artist's head by the way that they idealize shapes and things that they see in nature. And yeah, you need to kind of ask yourself, like, well, you don't need to. It's just, I've asked myself very, very often, like, what do I like about, what features do I like about a certain person when I'm doing a portrait of them, and how can I bring that forward and like show the best. Bring a bit of cool tones into this iris back here. See if I can bring a little bit of life. That little highlight is always super satisfying. Something that highlight, the placement of that is super crucial because it is where your light source is coming from. I'm going to place it right there, and then maybe something you'll often see is like a waterline or almost like a secondary highlight if you want to make the eyeballs feel really glossy. You don't want to overdo it. Now I'm going to go back with this texture brush and add just a little bit, a couple highlights. Around some of these areas where the skin is quite a bit more reflective. Around the nose, like there's just more oil buildup around those. Probably back up. And knock those back a tad. Oh, this is starting to look like something. Add a couple flyaways. I think I'm getting basically into that final polish. I can paint over everything and kind of refine the final image. these. Almost like vignetting the image, like not creating a vignette like around the image like you would normally see on the border, but vignetting the actual silhouette. That way if I make the background light again, it's like, it's a very obvious silhouette design. Down here, this is actually supposed to be skin. So I'm just gonna kind of color shift that. It's in the shadow, so I do want to color shift it towards like red, orange, something like that. You bring the saturation down, and I'll just glaze over it with oh, I think my lasso tool was way too feathered, but that's okay. It's in the sort of bottom of the image, so. So I'm gonna take my time on this. I think from here on out, it's really just about balancing balancing the detail of different areas, so that areas don't feel overworked in some places and underworked in others. But at the same time, like, there is a focal point that needs to be slightly more detailed. Like, you do kind of want to create a gradation, but this final polish is important, you know, to add that little bit of artistic flair. And I don't, like, sometimes it's nice to just see videos where artists time lapse through the last bit to just, you know, finalize. It's just like, okay, now I finalized my image and shebang shebang, it's all done. But other times it's also just good, especially if you're learning, to see the effort it actually takes, like, you know, to bring an image to a final result. It's not just like you do the 3 steps and then spend a little bit of time and then shebang shebang, it's done. Like, it is a fluid process where you're kind of working and reworking areas, and then, you know, stepping back, judging if it's at the point where you want it to be, if you can improve it, and constantly asking yourself whether it can be better or not a certain way, whether it's expressing what you want it to be expressing. And for me, this is the funnest part. It's like, once you've got everything on the canvas, you can, it's where the possibilities start to open up in terms of artistic expression, because you can, you know, glaze, you can color shift, you can really start to, like, stylize your shadows and light colors or zones. You could push the rendering basically in any direction, which is where I think most stylization happens, if you're an illustrator, at least. I mean, it does also come a lot in the actual drawing, like how you design the initial structure and shapes. But can do a lot in rendering too, especially if you're a more if you're more into realism. Because like I said, in this case, it's like 80% realistic, and the stylization comes in this little end portion where I'm making very particular decisions about where to put hard edges and where to put soft edges, and how much to show, how much to leave to the viewer. Maybe a bit of detail in the sleeve here. And I bring a similar little pop of color in the collar. And also play with global changes. Like, actually, I'll duplicate this one last time just for the final polish. But you can make global changes to the hue by bringing up your color balance. Control B in Photoshop. And I don't think my color balance menu shows up, but you have sliders to shift the color over. So you can make global changes. You know, if you wanted to make it feel really cold, you know, you could bring a lot of cool colors in. If you wanted to kind of warm it up and feel more cozy, then you bring some oranges and yellow in. You can play with, like, if you set this to pin light, right, and maybe you desaturate it, so that shouldn't change anything, but then you go into the highlights and bring out certain tones. You can kind of create cool, you know, stylistic stuff. Like, let's say you do that and you set it, oh yeah, you're setting it to pin light. So maybe drop the fill a little bit. You know, that adds it's a stylistic decision. I think I did like it though with a little bit more, with a little warmer tones. And then maybe I bring the highlights up just a tad with a levels adjustment. So, something like that. Yeah, it almost feels like this version's in the shadow, and this version has a little, like, sunlight or something. But it just brings the warmth in the skin out a little bit. And here, do a little bit of work on the hair, bringing some final little overlapping strands. I also have this kind of textured version of this brush for little flyaways around the face. I'm bringing that little bit of texture you see in hair sometimes. Bring a couple sharp highlights, kind of leading the eye into the face. Out here we have some kind of layer of hair that's coming out. This kind of just feels like there's a whole bunch of like toys to play with that are all laid out on the ground, like a whole bunch of Legos or something. Like all the components are there. Like I can just kind of color pick and move things around and sculpt and design all the little internal things. See what's interesting and experiment. So there's a lot of experimentation. Like sometimes I concentrate a little too much on being like oh, this result needs to happen, you know, one step at a time, be methodical and trust the process. But there's always room for experimentation in any illustration, especially in this polish, where you need to try stuff out and play a little bit. And some highlights in here. Yeah, little moments like that little sharp edge. If everything is sharp in your drawing or your painting, then those moments can't happen. They get drowned out by all the other stuff, all the other information that is like overwhelming. So that's why I build up to those little moments, and they really do pop out. Like it's one of the only sharp edges in the whole piece. It's just couple little subtle changes here and there. Maybe I bring some of these very darks more into the highlight. The sharper the contrast between the shadow and the highlight, the more glossy and like sparkly hair will feel. Because it almost becomes like a sharp specular highlight. even if there's a subtle value difference between the shadow and the highlight. Like you don't need a hue, like that your highlight doesn't need to be white for it to feel really shiny. It can be quite dark and you just have contrast. Okay, now I think we can really zoom in and just take a close look at the final form of the eyes. So maybe adding a couple little eyelashes, just sort of a little indication of them. Sometimes the shadow under the eyelashes is even more telling than than drawing the actual eyelashes. Like the shadow that's under the eye here is more telling that there's eyelashes than if you were just to do like that, you know. And here. And then here we have some subtle form changes to show that back nostril. You can bring just a little bit of pink into the lips here. And then just to show that this is hair, because it might not be super obvious, I'm just gonna add a couple flyaways. See what that looks like. Here, I think this shadow's a tad too saturated. Bring just bring some of that in. The hand needs a little bit of attention. It's looking a little bit, just a little bit blurry. So I'll just sharpen up some of these highlights and bring a little bit more structure to the fingers and knuckles and stuff. Some bounce light between the tendons. And it's never perfect because you have like veins and stuff. And then here we have some creases in the fingers. think hands, I can bring a little bit more realism in the creasing and detail. I might knock some of it back, but yeah, so I think I can knock some of this back. Maybe just keep like the major wrinkles. And then I'll also glaze over it with a bit of red to bring some subsurface. To the hand. Yeah. I'm trying to see this as a whole and not as just like painting a hand. I'm like painting a hand that's part of a larger image. So it needs to fit within the rest of the context. So matching the level of detail and color and all that stuff. So, honestly, hands and faces you could spend an eternity on. And that's about it. Maybe, no, that's gonna be too much. Nope. Forget about that. I'm just gonna add some little wispies. Maybe darken. Some layering in the hair. And I'm really looking at the hard edges and soft edges. Like which edges can I make softer and which edges can I reinforce. And which edges can I lose entirely? Like some, obviously when you're working from a realistic, like a real photo, almost everything is super crispy sharp. So you bring your artistic interpretation to focus the eye. Like not everything needs to be crisp. You can have a lot of almost like missing info, but and then that'll highlight of the lips. Maybe a little highlight on the shoulder. I kind of like along the arm. Oh, that might be a little too much. Almost like a jean that's also mixed with like polyester or spandex or something. Yeah, so now I'll make some final little adjustments to the silhouette. So I'm gonna want to bring back my line art and stick it under so that I still have a, if I take this away, maybe I colorize this. Like I still want some of that line art to be part of my silhouette. I think it just makes it feel a little more like an illustration. And I'm gonna erase some of the distracting parts maybe. But I kind of like what that does in areas like for hair and yeah, in general around the whole thing. It's a hay aesthetic. There you go. I think we're done here. Watch me continue to work on this for another 6 hours. What's going on? Why can't I draw? Oh, I'm on a eraser. A couple little flyaways. I'm just breaking. I think this is the first time I break out of my silhouette. So the flyaways, you can put a ton and just erase them out. I find it adds, a little bit of dynamism. So even if the main shapes are really like boldly designed, you still have some secondary stuff that's kind of realistic. Maybe. You can also do this like under so that you're not painting over everything. You can also use a smudge brush to bring it out of focus. Maybe a couple on this side. Just to kind of break up the silhouette of the hair and make it feel less like a block. And one last test that I'll do is set it to pin light and then just bring out the highlights. Sometimes it has a cool effect, sometimes it doesn't. Just adds the slightest bit of like heat around the highlight, which is just kind of cool. And I think I can exaggerate maybe one of the eyes. Magical iris. Too much. Maybe just something like that. Oh, now it kind of looks like she has two different eye colors, which is okay. This one, maybe there's a bit of rim light or something coming there. No. That's getting into the overworking stages. Yeah, so I think this reads pretty good. I'm gonna do a little liquefy. Let me duplicate this one last time. One more last time. And I'll just lower the hairline slightest amount. So I think that just feels a little bit better. Okay, so let's do a last like walk through, I guess, of the process. Oh no, that just, now I'm questioning a whole bunch of stuff. That's not super important. Oh dear, I'm gonna liquefy that too. Just because the eyes don't feel symmetrical. I might have just mucked all that up. Anyways, I'll fix it after. But yeah, so we have this final illustration. We did a whole bunch of different layers and or versions. So let's start from the beginning. We had a birthday drawing, and we did some flats, and we did our block in, basically blocking in color values and the general feel, and then we started detailing some stuff. So these are almost merged together, but yeah, so starting to model, basically modeling the form better. And then we have our first detail pass for bringing some material textures in and defining, you know, what's metal, what's jean color, and then really modeling and detailing out some of the face. And then we have our final detailing pass, so, you know, looking for the final look of the image, we did a little bit of color shifting, and then these final little touch-ups on the last version. So just some really subtle changes to some of the shapes. And yeah, so I think that's it. I think I'm gonna tone this background, just bring it down a tad so it's less jarring, and then make it play with different colors. I think I'll make it blue. I'll bring it blue so that it's kind of like the ref image. It does bring out the skin tone a lot more. Like that. And I'm just gonna crop it up like this. Oh, it's a bit of a better presentation. Yeah. That keeps sort of the focus right in the center. Yeah, so that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys learned something in this sort of rendering video about balancing stylization and realism. I think it's something that's kind of popular at the moment with technology and video games and entertainment. To do CG is advancing so much to make stuff look realistic, that the importance of stylization and art direction is becoming more and more important. But I think it's just a lot of artists are exploring this sort of thing, like myself. So I hope you learned something, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao.